Hello. Okay, now we're recording. Okay. So going back to what I was saying. So you know how sometimes you give lip service to certain things, right? So I think up until, to be very honest with you, up until the last recession in 2008, I don't think that I had ever given this topic much thought. I probably thought that I was a person who exemplified trust, but then I realized I actually wasn't. Okay. So we're going to see as we learn about it, how, trust sometimes we go into it in a time of challenge. It's like when we go through a challenge, then it's like we go to that place. And so what we want to do is develop this emotional state of trust, which we're going to define in a second, so that it almost becomes second nature, so that our default state of being is that. So we can really, whenever we have to grasp it, it's already there. We're not searching for it. And so that really is, when we talk about trust, as you're going to see when we're going to learn from a particular book, and I'll talk to you about this book in a second. Jackie, I think you might even own this book. Tell me if I'm wrong. No? Okay, so some of you who were in my Bitachon Boost retreat a couple months ago actually got a few copies. Some of you got copies of the book. But anyway, we're going to be learning straight from one of the main sources, Jewish text sources on the topic of trust, straight from it. One of the most authoritative sources on it, because I have found that we will see that this is really, when we talk about trust, is really an emotional state. But as anybody who's learned with me, or maybe with Mrs. Goldstein or elsewhere, you've probably already familiar with the idea that all emotions start from the intellect, right? So in order to cultivate this emotion, we actually have to learn. We actually have to grasp it in our minds. And it starts from the intellect, then it can trickle down into that emotion. And more than that, it really becomes a state of being. It's an actionable thing. I remember, I don't know when Margie Scherer is in the room right now. I don't think she is, but Margie Scherer, who also has been teaching a class on Bitachon for many years, and now we learn a class on prayer. Her husband, recently we were together, and he mentioned to me and my husband, he said, the code of Jewish law, which I'm sure you're all kind of familiar with, right? It kind of tells you what to do, how to do it, how to do things in life, right? How do you put on your tefillin? How do you give tzedakah? How do you implement Jewish law? So the code of Jewish law teaches you what to do. The Talmud teaches you how to think, right? We've all heard like those Talmudic discussions, and they're going back and forth, and they're having these arguments, and how does it work, right? How do you think, right? Chassidut, the inner dimension of the Torah that I think we're all in this room probably really familiar with, because we've hung out in Chabad houses and Chabad programs, and we've already understand that it gives you that inner taste of the why, what's going on, what is the Torah really trying to tell me in my practical life. Well, it really teaches you how to feel, right? How do I feel about this relationship? And then bitachon, which what we're going to start learning today, teaches us how to be. So it's an emotional state that ends up translating into action, where I can remain calm in a certain situation, where I can remain poised, where there's a state of certain tranquility. And we're going to, the author of this book is going to walk us through a lot of that, because I've reached that emotional state. But before we get there, we have to start with the intellect, right? We have to start learning it. So far, this makes sense. Yes, give me a sign. Give me a 1 in the comments if this is making sense. Give me a 2 if I already lost you. Yael Trusch. Okay, makes sense. And Tavia, I hope you can hear us. Okay, so what we're gonna do, amazing, Michelle, I'm so happy. And I know Michelle is like, yes, finally we're learning this book, because you've heard me talk about this book endlessly. Okay, so this book that I'm holding right here, as I said, is called The Gate of Trust. I'm sorry, The Gate of Trust. Oh, I'm going to mute. Sharon, welcome. Sorry, I muted you. And it is a book that, believe it or not, dates back to about the year 1040 in Spain. It was written by Rabeinu Bachya Ibn Pekuda, a judge, a Jewish judge and rabbi in Spain. And it has become the most, as I said before, the most authoritative text on the topic of trust in God, confidence and trust. And we'll define that in a second. But we're talking about an idea that is 1,000 years old. And as we go through it, we're going to see that it's like, how does he know to speak to us like as though he had been writing this today? And the style is like very linear, which makes it really nice. But how did he come about writing the text? What is the context of writing this book? Okay, so this book is only one portion of a series of a book called The Duties of the Heart. And this is the fourth portion. It's 10 portions in this Duties of the Heart. And what happened is that this judge, this rabbi, noticed at the time in Spain, in his given community and what was going on around him, that there was a lot of text regarding the ritual part of Judaism that we're all familiar with, right? How do we make Kiddush? How do we light Shabbat candles? How do we do certain things in business? What do we do when it's Rosh Chodesh? Oh, by the way, let's talk about that in a second. What do we do when it's Rosh Hashanah? What are the rituals that are involved in Jewish life? And however, there was little text for the average individual like ourselves here in this room, the day-to-day individual, to understand what he calls duties of the heart, which, by the way, in this context does not mean, in the poetic language of the time, does not mean necessarily the heart, it's more the mind. So meaning there is what we have to do as a ritual as Jews, and then there's how we think and feel as Jews. And so, believe it or not, this book was originally written in Arabic because the language of the people, the popular language in Spain of the working class average man, was either Spanish or Arabic. So this book was originally translated, is written in Arabic, and only 200 years later was it translated to Hebrew. And the translation that we have used since, it's that very translation. Okay, so it is a book written for us to understand how we need to think and feel about this thing called being Jewish in terms of the relationship with our Creator, right? We all know that there's a God. I think we kind of like have that premise covered. And then we relate to that God in different levels, right? Sharon is nodding at me like, yeah, I get it. Like, I have questions. I don't understand. Sometimes I like him. Sometimes I don't, right? We go through that process. Like, well, how do I relate to this thing? I know it's there, right? And sometimes I feel more affectionate. Sometimes I feel really distant, right? There is a relationship. And the relationship is a lot more than the Kiddush and the candles and everything else, although those things are key to the relationship, right? As we know, in every relationship, it's actually my anniversary tonight, and I think Mrs. Goldstein's anniversary. Happy anniversary. It's actually tomorrow for me. No, it's next month for you? Oh, so for me, I actually got married in a leap year. So my 17 years tomorrow. And would you believe nothing is by chance? And this is so connected to the class, because when we planned to do this class, we never really planned it around Rosh Chodesh. It happens to be that today is Rosh Chodesh, which means it's the first day of the month. And only last night or the night before did I say to Mrs. Goldstein, I can't believe it. Would you believe we're starting the class on Rosh Chodesh? Like, that is so cool. Why is it so cool? Because many of you might be familiar with this idea, but Rosh Chodesh, which we celebrate tonight, the day of tomorrow, is a holiday that is specifically associated or given in the Torah to women. Women have a special connection with Rosh Chodesh. What does this have to do with the class on trust? Well, it turns out that the reason we were given this holiday is because we, over the years, over the generations, we've exemplified as a gender, as Jewish women, compare relative to our peers, the men, we have exemplified a greater amount of trust. Where do we see it very clearly? Where did this come about? If you remember, we, after the giving of the Torah, the men tried to gather, well, they did it, but they went on a fundraising effort to their wives, desperately looking for gold and jewelry to do what? To build a golden calf. And what did the women say? No way. Like, there is no way. You guys are panicking over nothing. There's nothing to panic about. We went through Egypt and we knew the redemption was coming, and we've experienced all the miracles, and look where we are, and we're right here, and we have a promise from God, and we have a Torah. Moses is coming from the mountain, right? Moses is coming down with the 10 commandments. So again, we're already here. Like, this is happening. So this not only happened then, but it happened many, many, many times over, right? So the sages have said, this is why the women get the holiday of Rosh Chodesh, because the moon, what is the first day of the moon? It's celebrating the fact that there was no moon a couple hours ago, right? A day ago. And then now there's like a sliver of light, like the moon is coming out again. And so it is with Jewish continuity, right? So it is with the Jewish people. And the ones who always understood the waxing and wane, that cycle of continuity, of there's always a tomorrow, like this is going to happen, this is going to be, we are God's nation, we have a God to rely on, the promises are real, right? This is always going to get better. We're the women, the ones who trusted and believed in this were the women. So it's no coincidence that today we are getting together as Jewish women to talk about developing trust. I couldn't have planned it better, but then again, we have something greater to rely on. It's good that we don't rely on me. We rely on the one above. So what is trust? Okay, so the Israelis in the room probably know this very well, right? We all know, we go to Israel and we see the nice security. What do we call it? Bitachon, right? And we all rely on the bitachon. I was having a conversation with a friend who came from Mexico yesterday on Sunday, and she's been in Mexico, living in Mexico already for over a decade. And we got into the topic of the community life. And what did I say? I said, there's nothing like the Mexican bitachon. Everybody knows it. If you're in a Latin American community, Mexico is the bitachon par excellence, next to the Israelis. But where did they learn it from? From the Israelis, okay? So security, right? We all know the term. Oh, Galit can't come. Okay, I'm gonna turn off my WhatsApp. Security, more than security, we're talking about confidence, right? When I said, wow, you have such great bitachon in your community, right? You have so much trust in those boys. They do such an incredible job of protecting and serving the community, right? There is a security, there is a trust, okay? So that's what bitachon is. Evidently, we're going to understand this a little bit further. Just admit all. We all know the word in Hebrew, right? Betach, of course, sure, certainly, secure, okay? So that's trust. Now, there are two terms that we can sometimes get really used interchangeably and confused. And maybe you know this already, or you've already thinking about it. Thank you for the mazel tov. And the two terms are bitachon, and how about somebody types in the chat, what is the other word? And maybe I even mentioned it in English already, and you can type it in English if you know it. There's the concept of trust, and there's another idea that is almost used interchangeably, but we're about to see that they're not exactly the same. Anybody want to take a stab at it? Anybody want to type in the chat? Yes, 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 yes. Yehudit, she wrote it. Yes, Michelle, exactly, faith, right? So we all know, or we've all heard about faith, right? Faith, believe. Like I said before, I said, okay, so we all believe, we know there's a God, we know there's something else, there's something out there that's taking care of us, that has given us the opportunity to be in this world for whatever reason, right? That's sustaining us, right? We have that faith, it's innate in us. By the way, just so you know, It's in the spiritual DNA of everybody in this room. Like, this is just our makeup, okay? We come with this beautiful trait of faith. Trust is not faith, and faith is not trust. The Ramban Nachmanides, with an N at the end, the Ramban Nachmanides explains the difference as follows. He explains that you have a tree and you have fruit. If you see fruit, that means there's a tree, right? You can't have fruit without the tree, but you can have a tree without fruit, correct? Right? Yes? So the tree is faith. The fruit is trust. You can have faith, but you don't necessarily have to have trust. That would be like me 15 years ago, right? I was telling you the example. Only during the time of the recession did I even like start giving some contemplation and maybe learn about it and start developing a little bit of it. I was a woman of faith. What are you talking about? Like, I keep kosher. I believe in God. I keep Shabbat. What do you mean? I'm not a woman of faith. I'm a woman of faith. Now, trust is a different concept. So you can have the tree, but that doesn't mean you have the fruit. Now, if you have the fruit, you for sure have the tree, okay? If you have the bitachon, you for sure have the faith. Because what are you relying on? You're relying on God Almighty, right? So that's the premise. Okay, so we get that so far? Now I'll make it even simpler. And I love this analogy. Some of you have heard me say it time and time again, but I will repeat it once more because I love it so much. Imagine we were at the Twin Towers, okay, back in the day. And you have the two buildings, right? And you put the rope, and there's a tightrope walker guy who's gonna go and do his act, right? One of those tightrope walk shows. By the way, we made the poster, the little flyer for this class with that, which was such a great idea. It wasn't even my idea. It was Mrs. Goldstein's. So you have a tightrope walker, and you're about to watch him do his amazing show. And you say to him, go for it. You're going to be amazing. You are just awesome. I'm cheering you on. That's faith. Bitachon, trust, is if you go on his back. If you go on the guy's back on the rope, that's bitachon. That is confidence, trust, and reliance. Do you get the difference? It's very different to be watching the guy doing it than being with him doing it. Yes, did that make sense? Tell me in the chat with a 1. Tell me that it made sense. Give me a 2 if you're completely lost. Okay, so I'm getting 1s. Okay. All right, 1. Okay, perfect. So I like this visual because it makes it very clear. Okay, so I could be watching the guy and I really have faith that this guy's going to be great. If I really trust the guy, I'm going on his back. I'm going on his back on that rope across the Twin Towers. Okay. All right. So we also have, when we talk about faith, it's belief in God Almighty. There's also, and then there's a belief and an understanding that everything he does is for the good. And sometimes we could struggle grasping that idea, and we're not going to delve into it right now, but it's going to maybe come up. Okay. But that's part of faith, understanding that even if I don't get how this is good, God is only good and he's giving us good. God is only kindness, and all he's showering is kindness. It might not come packaged as kindness. I'm not receiving it as kindness, and that's a whole different concept, but there is that idea. I believe in that. Okay. Now, faith can remain very detached. Cognitive dissonance, again, because the classic example, you may have heard it, is that is given in the Talmud, is the thief, that he goes to rob the house, and as he's entered the house and he's about to do his cleanup, he raises his eyes to heaven and asks God to bless him in his endeavor, right? That is very detached. because if you actually trusted, you would know that you don't have to steal to get your livelihood or whatever it is that the thief is trying to get, right? So yes, you have evidently you believe in God. It's very nice that you ask God for help, that you believe there's something above you that with his help you could succeed. That's beautiful, right? But it didn't become active. It's not actionable, right? There's a cognitive dissonance there because evidently if I trusted, right, in that whom I believe in, right? I believe in God. The thief believes in God. But if he trusted, then he would know that he doesn't have to steal to get what he needs, right? Make sense? Yes? Okay. And then the other thing is, like I said before, that faith is something constant in a sense that we all kind of carry with us, whereas trust is something that gets exercised in specific situations. It's more of an active thing and gets kind of like awakened when we are facing a particular challenge. But before we move on to the text, there's another important term that I want us to kind of clarify, and that is hope. The difference between faith and hope, trust and hope. And we all know we are people of hope. And it's very important to have hope, like super, super important to have hope, okay? But trust is beyond hope. So we're already establishing that trust is beyond faith in many ways. Now we're going to say that trust is different than hope and above hope also in a different way. Because what is hope? Hope is what we have when we have a ray of a solution, right? When they've given you something, a lifeline to hold on to. And then there's hope, right? We hope on that thing, right? Trust is, there's no lifeline. There's absolutely no lifeline. And yet I remain certain, there's a confidence that the outcome will be a good outcome. That the outcome, remember I said how we know that everything that God is good, but it's not always packaged in a good way. Well, that's really where trust comes in. And I don't want to get too derailed in this now, because I think we're going to see it as we move along over the book, the progression of the book. But there's something that trust achieves, that it's like bypassing the natural order. Okay. It breaks the rules of nature so that whatever needs to come down here sometimes gets in the way the Kabbalah of this whole thing works, which I'm not going to explain right now. Maybe in our last class, we'll explain it. Doesn't come in the prettiest package. That's why we don't perceive it to be good. Bitachon, what actually on a Kabbalistic level achieves, is that it can break through that order of the natural world so that things come to me in the right packaging, in the beautiful packaging that it was always intended to be, but that now I can perceive it. Okay, this is very important, but just keep it kind of like, keep it in the back of your mind. Okay, so I think with that, we are actually ready to get into the book. Up to here, are there any questions? You can unmute yourself, you can raise your hand, you can type it in the chat. Up to here, we're good? Okay. Amazing. So like I said, we are going to go inside the book. And what's really beautiful is that when I started learning this topic many, many years ago, oh, Margie's here. When I started learning this topic, and even when Margie started learning and teaching this topic, we didn't have the benefit of this wonderful edition, which is really the original from Rabeinu Bachya, but with commentaries based on the teachings, the mystical teachings of Chassidut and other commentaries to expound on what the original text was saying. So it really gives a lot of richness, and it really helps us through the understanding and the progression of the work. So it's really, really very beautiful. So many years ago, when I started looking into this text, I should actually tell you that what ended up happening during that recession is that I kept watching different video clips of the Lubavitcher Rebbe meeting with people. And you know how people used to come to the Rebbe with different challenges in life, you know, like whether it be health or work or with raising children or whatever, you know, challenges we all go through, right? And I would see that time and time again, the Rebbe would say, learn the book Shara Bitachon. Shara Bitachon from the Chavos HaLevavos. And I heard it so many times that I finally told my husband, Matt, maybe there's something here. Maybe we should be learning this book. Like, what is this stuff? And lo and behold, this is what it is. So today we're so blessed that we have the original, but that is all to say that, again, this is the authoritative source on this topic, although there are many other, kind of other comments developed from this. And some of them we will actually reference. Okay, so we're going to go inside. Welcome everybody who just joined in, who I didn't say welcome before. Hey, Margie, I already quoted your husband. Would you believe? Already in the first 5 minutes. Rabbi Scherer. Okay. All right, so we're going to go straight inside. And the author of the books, just so we know, again, we're starting this is the 4th of a 10-part series. The first few parts already he's gone over, our belief in God, our relationship with all the kind of like the stuff that I kind of like said, okay, we sort of get that. And maybe we have questions, but he's just jumping at a point where now that you know that you're in a relationship and that for whether you understood it or not, you're here to serve your creation. You're not really here to serve yourself, right? We're all serving something. It's a question of who we're serving. Who's your master? Is your ego your master? Is your boss your master? Who's your master? Everybody has a master, right? I think we discussed that yesterday in class, Margie. But anyway, now that you know that you're in a relationship where you're here to serve your creator, right? Let me instruct you on one of the most important tools for you to have meaning in that relationship of service, so that it's actually a meaningful relationship where you can actually achieve a state of calm and tranquility, which we're going to see as one of the benefits. Okay, so he says, on placing our trust in God alone, and this is a very important qualifier that we're going to see, okay, we're talking about God alone as opposed to trusting other things. The author himself introduces, having previously discussed in the previous gate the obligation to accept the service of God, I have seen it to be appropriate now to explain that which is needed for a person who wants to be a servant of God, and that is to rely on him on all matters. So we're saying, in order to be of service to our creator, to have the most productive relationship, right? I came here to be of service to the world. Every morning I wake up and we all express gratitude, right? We say, Mode ani lefanecha, right? I am thankful to you, living and eternal King, for giving me back my soul. Your faithfulness is great. So if we think about that, every morning we're coming here because God has faith that we have something to do in his world, that we have a special contribution. There is something that everyone in this room can do that is completely unique. It's not what I'm doing. It's not what Margie's doing. It's not what Mrs. Goldstein is doing, right? And that is why we're here, right? So we're here because our creator knows that we can serve him and his world here in a unique world, okay? So now that we know that, Rabeinu Bachya is saying, let me tell you something that I think is so necessary for you to be able to do that. And that is to rely on God, your creator, the one who chooses you every morning and puts you in this world every second, because God is creating us right here in this second, in this room, right? Every millisecond, right? To rely on him in all matters, meaning trust is not compartmentalized, which often happens. I was having a discussion with somebody the other day, and I was saying, actually, Margie, you'll laugh, because I was saying to my friend, I was saying, I'm learning this book on trust, and it's a different book than this one. It's another one that we were learning, and maybe we'll even learn it, ladies, together at some point. And I was just raving about the book, and this person told me, oh, you and your trust. And I said, well, did you hear that speaker who was saying all these amazing stories about how he ended up marrying his 4 children on trust alone? Like, he had so many miracles because he really developed his trust. And then like the floodgates of heaven open, and he didn't have any money for this wedding, and all of a sudden he had, and then the next wedding and the next wedding, right? And then my friend says, when it comes to that, I'm all for trust. But when it comes to this part of my life and what's going on in my work and my communal affairs, I just don't get it. I don't get how the trust works. And here we're saying, no. It's not compartmentalized. It's in all matters. It's not, oh, God, when it comes to the money, yeah, I got, you can be involved. Like this is I rely on you. But when it comes to finding a marriage partner, or when it comes, I don't know, I got that under control, right? We've all heard that joke of the guy who's like looking for a parking and he's at the airport and the airport parking is packed. And he has this flight to get to this really major meeting because he's closing a multi-million business deal and he just has to get to that meeting in New York and he has to park his car and there's no parking space and he's going to miss his plane. And he says, God, if you find me a parking spot, I'll give $10,000 to tzedakah, to charity. And he's going around the next floor and no parking. And that, God, I'll give $25,000 to tzedakah. Nothing. He keeps going. Now he's in floor 5 of the airport parking and the clock is ticking. Okay, God, if you find me a parking lot, I'll give you half the deal. Okay. I'll give you half the deal is you. $500,000 are yours. Somebody pulls out. He goes in. God, don't worry. I got this one. Right. I found a parking lot. So sometimes we have that attitude, right? It's again, that cognitive dissonance. So here Rabeinu Bachya is saying, it's in all matters. It's in God alone, and it's in all matters. Okay. There's something that before we move further with the text, we have to also kind of clarify, because the question gets asked very often. Well, is this a mitzvah? Right? Did anybody already think of this? Like, is this a mitzvah? And it's something that has been discussed over and over again. And in terms of how the mitzvot are codified by the Rambam, Maimonides, no, he actually did not include it in one of the 613 mitzvot. However, it remains undoubtedly by him and everybody else quoted as something that is already included in the mitzvahs, for example. And there are other sages, like Margie and I were learning another book on bitachon where the Beis Halevi does argue that it is a mitzvah. So there's much discussion on whether it is a formal mitzvah or it's already part of a mitzvah. For example, there is a commandment not to fear your enemy in war. And so many of the authorities say, well, that is trust, like right there. When not fearing is trusting. Do not fear your enemy when you go out to war, right? So there's a lot of discussion on this. And basically the idea is that whether it really is not relevant whether it's codified as one of the mitzvahs or not, because everybody understands that it is a fundamental principle in order to be in that relationship. Okay. So we have to understand this is not, oh, it's a nice thing to have. It's an add-on. I want to argue for all of us in the room that it is, like Rabbi Scherer was saying, it teaches you how to be, right? It's part and parcel of our Judaism. Okay. So now he goes on to say, the author, that by doing so, by having trust in God, there are going to be great benefits, both in spiritual matters, in Torah affairs, and in worldly matters. So, so interesting. Like, what are the benefits here? Like, what is he talking about, right? So we just said, okay, so it's a fundamental part of our faith. Oh, and we actually benefit from them. So on a spiritual level, and we could probably understand why, like, right? Because again, it's like, I always said, like, actually, I'm just gonna tell you something else. Okay. There is one of the commentaries that attributes this commandment of this idea of trust, okay, to the commandment of fearing or having awe of God, right? If I have awe of my creator, if I'm so impressed by my creator, right, then I automatically trust in him. And also, it's also associated with the love of God, right? If I love this creator, if I'm in this loving relationship, like any relationship, I trust. And this is actually a very important point, because we all know that trust is the fundamental of any relationship. I should have said this at the beginning, but all of us know that in any relationship, trust is the fundamental, right? Like, you can't stay in a relationship. You could stay in a relationship. You're going to have to work on building the trust. If the trust is broken, there's going to be a lot of work that needs to be done. Okay. So it is fundamental. So again, we go back to this principle. This is not just a nice to have. This is essential. It's essential that we get it. Okay. So what are the ways that we can benefit? He says we can benefit. So he's going to list us 5 ways in which developing trust is going to benefit our life. The first of those is tranquility. Okay. So that's what we're going to talk about right now. He says the first benefit is that a person is going to be free from worry. And that way he's going to have energy to devote to being a productive servant of Hashem, doing what he needs to be doing in this world, fulfilling his mission. So among the spiritual benefits is tranquility of the soul, which is free of worry as a result of his reliance, his trust on God, just like a servant is bound to place his trust in his master. And it's interesting that he uses that example because we don't think about it nowadays like that. But if you think about the context of the book, like I told you, it was written 1,000 years ago. You think about the idea of a master and a servant, right? A servant, really, the relationship that he has with his master is he knows that his master is going to take care of all his needs, right? He's going to take care of his shelter and his food and his clothing and everything else in order that he can just be concerned with serving his master, right? So that's the deal, right? In that relationship. Today, we can't really relate to that, okay? But this is why he's bringing this analogy. So there's going to be a tranquility. You're not going to have to be worried because you're relying on God, just like a servant relies on his master. You can just be concerned with being of service because everything is going to be taken care of. Okay. And I will add here a beautiful footnote. As I said, this book has beautiful commentary that is brought down here from the 4th Rebbe of Lubavitch, the Rebbe Maharaj. And those of you who've been in class with me have heard me say this a million times. Actually, Jackie, you've heard me say this one. I am sure you could probably fill in the blanks. Okay. And this is how it goes. He says, a Jew is never deficient in sustenance. Okay. Sustenance and money, right? In parnasa. Rather, he is deficient in his trust in God. Can you believe how radical this concept is? Can you believe it? Okay, think about the paradigm shift here. We're not deficient. There's sustenance. You're not deficient in that. What you're deficient is in your trust in God, who's the source of the sustenance. He continues, there is an abundance of sustenance prepared for every Jew. However, if a person is deficient in trust, the sustenance does not reach him. So you see how I told you that Rabeinu Bachya is going to talk to us about the benefits, both in worldly matters and material concerns and in spiritual concerns. Here, the Rebbe Maharaj is telling us very clearly, by the way, you're worried about your livelihood. Well, that's the wrong approach because livelihood is there. It's ready to come to you. But if you're worried, if you don't trust that God Almighty has livelihood for you, God forbid, it might not reach you. It's a very important concept. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe takes on that concept and he expounds on it and gives us a visual for it. And he says it's like a faucet. Think about a faucet. Bitachon, confidence and trust, is a faucet. If the faucet is turned on, the blessings pour through. They flow. But if it's off, nothing is going to come down, right? So again, with bitachon, the blessings come. You can build a very nice house. But if you don't build the piping and connect it to the water thingy, everybody else in the neighborhood is going to get water. It's going to flow. The water is available. The water exists. It's going to flow. It's going to flow to the house that got built with the piping that got connected to receive from the source. So it's the piping. Bitachon is the piping. Are we getting this? Okay. So we're to connect to the source, we got to have the right piping. And this is what the piping is. It's bitachon. Okay. So for the text continues, for a person who does not place his trust in God, places his trust in an entity other than God. So this is something that Margie, I think we discussed maybe yesterday in your class. we're always trusting in something, guys, right? Think about it. Like always, it's de facto what's happening. You're going to place your trust in something, whether it be the ground on the floor, that you're going to wake up in the morning and there's going to be ground on the floor, that there's a sun going to be shining. You're always trusting in something. Your parents, your mother, your spouse, your boss, the stock market, the president, whatever it might be. And what he's arguing here is, which one is it going to be? Because there is going to be, by human nature, something that we're going to trust. And so the challenge for us is placing our trust in the only thing that can provide. And during this progression of the book, he's going to give us extensive arguments on why this is actually the only sensical solution. It's the only sensical alternative. And we would be insane not to put our trust in God, because he's going to show us how every other alternative that we can think of is deficient relative to God. Okay, so if a person places his trust in something other than God, then God removes his divine providence from him and leaves him in the hands of the entity in which he places trust. I am going to take a big pause here, because what I just said is a big mouthful that deserves a lot of explanation. He just told us the following. He just said, if a person places his trust in something other than Hashem, than God, then God is going to conceal himself and leave him under the influence of that which he trusts on. Let me explain. We all know, we all said it was by divine providence, right? It wasn't coincidence that we started this class in Rosh Chodesh, and it's a day that's connected to women and it's connected to trust, right? We all know that there is providence. What does it mean? There is a hand of God that is operating everything. Nothing is random, right? Nothing about us getting together in this room, nothing about what you do for a living, where you went to school, where do you grew up, how the conversations you had today with your spouse, your children, your coworkers. None of that is random. In every single detail of your life, God has his hand in it. Like, it is all being orchestrated, which actually is a very comforting thought. The fact that God is individually involved in each of our lives. So how can he say that God, who has to be involved because he's not a creator, it's antithetical to Judaism to even think of the fact that God created the world one day and he removed himself and then it just runs on autopilot. That's not Judaism, by the way. Judaism says God creates the world every single moment. It's called constant creation. God is involved in everything that is happening to you and I every millisecond. If God wouldn't choose us to be here and everything to be happening, it wouldn't happen. Everything would cease to exist. Okay. So if this is a fundamental principle, how could he say that when I trust my boss, that I'm going to get my salary from him and I better serve him and I better do my job 100% right to the T, because if not, I'm not going to get my bonus. How can he say that that is going to affect the involvement that God has in my life? If I already established that God has to be intimately involved in my life, because that's a fundamental of Judaism. Otherwise, everything would cease to exist. So here's how it works. You ever seen those people or met those people? And I know some of you are in this room because you are good friends, who always see the hand of God revealed in your lives. It's like almost like things happen to them in an almost unnatural way, like what we call a miracle. Like, oh my God, like seriously, are you kidding me? Like that just happened to you? Like, that's crazy. Like, we would have never come up with that solution to that problem. We would have never thought of that idea. Like, how in the, yeah, that just happened. Isn't that crazy? Right? There's people whose life is the hand of God is constantly visible in their life, like in an open, revealed way. And then there's some of us where life is just, like it just whatever it is, it feels kind of random. Like things happen and they're pretty much the natural way. Like it's like there's primary providence or primary involvement where God is really involved and things happen above the natural order. And then there's a secondary providence, which means like God is obviously doing his thing, but what he's done is he's added concealment because we created that concealment. Okay, so it's a mutual relationship. So you decided that you want to trust something and that you depend on the stock market or the president or the economy or whatever it is, or the doctor, whatever it is, right? Great. So now I'll leave you, because you've chosen that, to the natural forces of that, to that which you trust, right? And it's kind of like good luck to you, because as we're going to see, they all pale in comparison to what the king can do, right? So evidently, it's not of a benefit to any of us, okay? But that's the dynamic that's happening here. Do we get this? Because this piece is complex and it's really, really important that we get, okay? So there's always going to be involvement. It's a matter of the involvement is more concealed, divine involvement, or it's going to be more revealed. And if I want the natural order of things, how things, I can perceive them clearly and how they should function to be my reality, then that's what's going to be. I'm going to be left at the mercy of those forces, of whatever my boss decides and the stock market does. That's kind of like how I'm going to perceive reality. It doesn't mean that God is not operating things behind the scenes. It's like the way I perceive it, it's, oh my gosh, again, my boss didn't give me the raise. And then there's people who say, can you believe it? He didn't give me the raise, but look, I just got an insurance policy for $60,000. And it's like, whoa, right? It's like you just bypass the natural order. Where did that come from? Right? So there's people who live in a state of, you know how people say you have to see to believe? And this one I heard from Margie, I think. It's not you have to see to believe. It's you have to believe to see. Okay, so that's what's happening here. So obviously there's always going to be God. But if we are placing our trust in other things that are fickle, that are part of nature, that are just the agents of God Almighty, then of course, that's fine. God will allow us to have that experience. That will be our more revealed experience. Then if those people who actually trust in God, and again, this is something that we practice and practice again. I'm not saying like tomorrow we're all going to like master this. No, hello, I'm the first to not master this. Believe me, this is why we're learning this, okay? But when we do, and I know beautiful, wonderful humans in this room who've experienced the revelation of the hand of God, not just once, twice, thrice, like they literally live in that zone because they trust, okay? So he continues and he tells us, and then we're going to, we're about to end. Okay. And the person who places his trust in something other than God will be like one regarding whom it is said. And he's going to quote here from Jeremiah. He's going to give us now 5 proofs for this idea of God removing his providence and leaving us at the mercy of the natural forces. One of the quotes from one of the prophets is, "For my people have committed 2 evils. They have forsaken me, the spring of living water." Me, God is the spring of living waters. "To dig for himself cisterns." You know what a cistern is? Like that holds the water. "Broken cisterns that do not hold water." So what are the 2, sins or misguided things that a person who doesn't trust in God has done? They had the source of the living water. They had the source of the blessing available. That's all of us, right? But we traded it for something completely worthless, a man-made cistern that it doesn't even work because it's broken. It can't even hold anything. So this is what the prophet is saying. Okay, this is one of the proofs that Rabeinu Bachya is bringing us to, for us to understand the dynamic, what's happening here when we're not placing our trust in God. Then he continues and he gives us another proof from King David, from Psalms. And that says, as the verse says, they exchanged their glory for the likeness of an ox eating grass. What is an ox eating grass? Well, he's talking about the golden calf that we mentioned at the beginning, right? The Chet HaEgel, right? When the Jewish people worshiped the golden calf, we traded God for a calf, for a golden calf, right? Again, we had something really good and we traded it. And he continues with the next textual proof. And this is going to happen throughout the text. As the verse says, blessed is the man who relies on the Lord, and the Lord will be his support. And this is actually, if I read it to you in Hebrew, you'll remember it from benching, from what we sing after we eat bread. Okay. And so what he's saying is, it's mida keneged mida, which is a concept in Judaism that everything happens. It's like, one is the consequence of the other. It's a natural consequence. The man who relies on God, then God will be his support. Like, it goes hand in hand. Okay. There's a relationship here that we're talking about. So if we have trust in God, we're going to be protected by him. But if we don't have trust, then he's suggesting that we're not going to be protected by him, right? And he continues to give us another quote from Tehillim. This is the fourth one. And he says, fortunate is the man who made the Lord his support and did not turn to the haughty and those who turn to falsehood, right? So again, it's praising the person who relies on God rather than turning to others. And we're going to talk about later on, he's going to talk about the fact that a person who trusts in God not only is going to achieve tranquility, which is kind of like the idea that he's trying to get to right now, but he also will have independence. He won't depend on others. Okay, so there's a straightforward choice here. You either rely on God or on another entity. Like I said before, there's no middle ground. And then the last proof that he brings is again from Jeremiah, and he says, cursed is the man who relies in man and makes flesh his arm, and whose heart turns away from the Lord. Now, this requires a little bit of explanation, because why these strong words? Cursed, right? Like, what is this curse that it's why are we cursed if we rely in others, in man, in something of flesh and blood, and we turn away from the real source of everything, God? And it's not a curse, really. I want to clarify this. What it really is saying, it's a natural consequence. The natural consequence on relying on man, of flesh and blood, is that that's what you get. If that's what you rely on, then you're limited to that possibility. So somebody had said, I think in the chat before, I think it was here, and this, I can't remember, but somebody had talked about the idea of infinity, right? So we're talking about connecting and trusting in that which is infinite and has infinite potential and infinite ability to deliver. And therefore we can be tranquil, because nothing can go wrong. If I actually rely on that, then I have everything to win. Or I could stay in the realm of the limited and then rely on man. And then God says, great, so rely on man. That's great. Like, that's the extent of what you get. That's the reality that you will see. Okay. So this is all what he's come to this point just to introduce the idea. This is not even chapter 1. This is all his introduction to the idea. And then he's going to give us 4 other benefits. And then he's going to explain to us exactly why God is the what's the word I'm looking? The entity par excellence to put our trust on, because everything else falls short. And then how does that apply in practicality? Like, all of this sounds really good, but then we all have questions, I'm sure already. Well, what does that mean about going to work? And what does it mean about when I'm scared of something? And what does that mean about me going to the doctor? Like, how does that, right? Because we're in this world. So how does this concept really apply in my practical situation? But he's going to take us through a progression of that. Okay. So I want to stop here, because I feel like this was a lot. And then next week, I want to finish the benefits, because it becomes very short, and then we'll start the next piece. But why don't we open the mics or the chat for any questions up to what we covered now that might have come up. And I think you can unmute yourself, but you could raise your hand and I'll unmute you. You know how to do that in the little button, yeah? Or you could just type in the chat.
Yeah, I do have a question here.
Yes.
I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself, but trust. Is it, if something happens to me, I have to trust that it is a good thing? or I have to trust kind of in advance that good things are going to happen?
Great question. So I think the answer to the question is twofold. Number one, we have to trust in advance that only good is going to happen to us. Okay. So the second thing that you said is the first thing that we need to put into practice, right? I have a cup here. It's no coincidence. Wait, it says think good and it will be good. I didn't mention it, so thank you for bringing it up, Michelle. But one of the this is not just a cute slogan in a mug. It's actually based on something that one of the Rebbes of Chabad and the Lubavitcher Rebbe used to quote him often. The Tzemach Tzedek used to say, "Tracht good, v'sein good." Think good and it will be good. And that is what bitachon is. Bitachon means that, like you just said, Michelle, I trust that things are good and that they will be good. Emunah, faith, is I know that everything that God does is good. Trust is I know that it will come to me in a good package. So that the second thing you said is something that we continuously do. Now, to the first part of your question where you asked, I think you asked when something negative happens. Yeah. What was the first part of the question?
Yeah, like something in general happens, good or bad. Mm-hmm. So do we have to trust? I mean, clearly it's more obvious if it's a good thing that it's a good thing, but if it's a bad thing, do we have to trust that it's a good thing?
Right. So that's when, number one, during that experience, the activation of our trust is so critical, right? To change that reality. And also, whether it changes or not, it also, the way we experience that, the emotional state that we're in is a completely different emotional state. See, we all go through challenges, right? Like we all do. And then there's people who can take challenges and you're like, how in the world are they still so calm, so collected, so with it? Like, so you compare them to other people who fall apart, right? Like literally fall apart. So Judaism is saying there is a strategy here so that we don't fall apart. Now, if, God forbid, whatever is going to come our way did not come in the right packaging, despite the fact that we might be practicing as much of our trust as we can, right? Then we evidently always fall into emunah, into faith, right? Evidently, we always fall into the fact that this didn't turn out the way I thought it would turn out. But because I trust that God knows what is best for me, I'm accepting it. That doesn't mean that I stop praying for change. This is a very important point. Thank you, Michelle. But it means that because I have faith that everything is good and I trust in God, I'm going to take it. And I could still ask for change. Yes?
Yep, that makes total sense.
Okay.
Thank you.
Amazing. Anything else? Anything else, ladies? So we are going to continue. Margie, thank you for being here. We are going to continue next week on Tuesday. We will talk about, we'll finish all the benefits and hopefully we will progress. And I think we will all hopefully, and you'll tell me as you're going through the journey, if you feel like just learning this and having these conversations helps you a little bit more in your trust whenever you are going through your week between now and then. Like, even if you can have that consciousness of God has my back, I know I'm not alone. There's something other than this that I'm experiencing right now. My boss is being really difficult, or the doctor is telling me something that, it doesn't sound right, right? Even during those experiences, can we raise our consciousness and go to that place? But I know I have something that is so much more reliable. And we haven't even yet learned about how that is much more reliable, but we've already planted the seed that there is something more. And if I go to that place, can I notice how I cope with that aggravation, sort of? Yes. So can we do that throughout the week and see how that goes for us? Yeah. Okay. You have been an amazing group. I want more mics open. Anybody has anything to say before we go? Love the class. Okay, good.
Great class. Thank
okay,
you.
guys, come back next week and bring your friends. Again, this is super, super important for all of us. Okay, love you guys. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.